In the mid-90s, my parents took my older brother and me on vacation to Cancun, Mexico, when we were teenagers. I was 13 and my brother was 18. My brother and I shared a room. He was old enough to go out to the bars, leaving me alone in the room to watch movies and be bored out of my mind. My parents wanted to hang out with us the whole time, but we were too cool and tried to distance ourselves from them as much as we possibly could. I was mature for my age. I had previously had some underage drinks with my friends and felt that I was old enough and cool enough to go to the downtown bars of Cancun. When I asked my brother if I could join him, he laughed at me and told my parents. So I was really bitter that I had to stick back in the room, or worse, forced to hang out with my folks. So the third or fourth day into our vacation, I was sitting at one of the hotel bars, nursing a Shirley Temple, feeling sorry for myself. A woman, nicely dressed in her mid to late 20s, sat down next to me and we started chatting. I don't remember the details of what we talked about. I just remember her being really interested in what I had to say, and she made me feel like I was really mature for my age, what 13-year-old me would have craved. We made arrangements to meet at the resort bar the next day to hang out some more. So the next day comes. We meet in the resort lounge at lunchtime and hung out. She listened to my stories about how BS it was that I couldn't go out drinking, sympathizing with me. She then offered to get me alcoholic drinks. After 3 or 4 drinks, I was getting pretty drunk, and this was when she asked me if I wanted to go back to the room with her and hang out and watch a movie. Drunk 13-year-old me thought this was a great idea, as I was going to get some more booze and this cool 20-something chick wanted to hang out with me. I thought I was super cool. Just as we were leaving the lounge, my mom appeared. She was meeting my dad at the pool. My mom doesn't know what's going on and thinks I'm heading to my hotel room. Drunk me proudly introduces my new friend to my mom, telling her that we're going back to this woman's room to watch a movie. My mom's face goes from, "Hi, how's it going?" to, "Get your ass up to your room right now." Mom tells my new friend that she has no business inviting a 13-year-old back to her room, and that she is not going to talk to me again or she'll call the police. At that moment, I was so angry with my mom, but she had that "don't mess with me" look, so I knew I had to just keep my mouth shut. The next day I was heading out to the pool and saw that woman sitting at the bar with 2 men in their late 50s, who I can only describe as menacingly scary. She pointed at me, and one of the men glared while the other one winked at me. It sent shivers down my spine. I'm a long-haul trucker. I see and deal with a lot of weird and scary stuff. I was traveling up US 93 in Nevada, heading to Portland for a delivery. It was around 1:30 in the morning, and I needed to stop and log my half-hour break. I found a wide spot and pulled off. I did my logs and then made myself a sandwich. While I was eating said sandwich, I noticed a vehicle pulling behind me. I didn't get too concerned about it, but kept one eye on it while I ate. Then it got kind of strange. I noticed a figure in the headlight of the vehicle approach the back, driver's side of my trailer, stop, and looked like he or she was rubbing the back or side of my trailer with their hand. Suspicious, for sure. I got my pistol out of my lockbox, cocked it, and loaded it. Slid it behind my waistband, then proceeded to climb out of my rig. I was walking about 10 feet back. I kept my hand on the butt of the pistol, flicked my flashlight on, and aimed it at the person. It was a man. Weird-looking fellow in a dirty whitish trench coat, long straggly hair, and bald on top. He was rubbing something on the side of my trailer. I hollered at him to stop what he was doing. He looked up at me and smirked, and without turning his gaze off of me, started walking toward me. I backed my way to the door, keeping my hand on the pistol but not pulling it out yet. I didn't feel like my life was in danger at that moment. I opened up my door and climbed back into my rig. I shut the door and then locked it. The dude walked up to my door, looks up at me, still smirking. This dude is off his rocker. I'm thinking my half-hour break is definitely over and it's time to go. However, I'm looking down at him and getting ready to turn the key. I feel my truck rock. I jump and look in my driver's side mirror. Nothing. I look over and check my passenger side mirror. And there, on my step, face pressed to my passenger side window, is a freaky, perfect replica of an old witch, smiling with rotten teeth, cocking her head left and then right, fogging up my window. Needless to say, I about sucked my seat up my ass. And that's not the end of it. Oh no. The dude then jumps up on my driver's side step, proceeds to start licking my window. Then the witch lady starts smacking my window with the palm of her hand, over and over. Then the dude starts telling me to open up my door. Hey boy, open up. Come on now, open up. We're friendly. What you got in this trailer of yours? Anything good? Open up, boy. Now I feel threatened. I pull my pistol out, and the chick immediately disappears off my passenger side step. The dude laughs, then jumps down and jumps off my step. Just grins, touches fingers to his nose, then jumps off my step again. I fired my truck up and took the hell off. Never did see any headlights following me, thank God. So to those disturbing travelers, yeah, let's not meet again. This was a very long time ago, so the timeline might be a little bit off and the details are fuzzy, but I've written it out exactly as I recall it. In the early 2000s, my family was living in Europe, and in December of 2001, we were coming back home to Latin America for a Christmas vacation. My brother and I and my dad were flying together from Paris to Miami. My dad was seated in business class, while my brother and I were in coach, sitting in the middle two seats in the middle row. The flight was pretty normal at first, absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. About 4 or 5 hours into the flight, I was reading a book, almost dozing off when I heard a woman start to repeat the word no over and over. At first it was really quiet, almost inaudible, but it quickly got very loud and urgent. Before I realized what was happening, she was screaming no, no, no at the top of her lungs. I looked up and saw a flight attendant a few rows ahead of me to the right, hunched over someone sitting in the window seat. My first thought was that the passenger was having a heart attack or a catastrophic health problem, but her yelling was so unsettling that that couldn't be it. There's a strange, long delay in people's reaction. Nobody did anything. I completely panicked and froze in my seat. My brother, on the other hand, jumped out of his seat, jumped over the person sitting next to him, and ran up to see what was going on. He was up there in a matter of seconds, and as he approached, suddenly everyone around us stood up to see what was going on and or to try to help. She kept screaming over and over. She was struggling with this passenger. He was really tall, so tall that his whole head was visible over the back of the seat. He had very long, black curly hair. My brother came back to our row and said, "Something is wrong," before going back up to get a closer look. Passengers close to her began struggling with the guy as well. A bunch of people jumped on him and started pulling at him. Someone in the row behind him even pulled his hair back so hard, his face jerked towards the top of the plane. He let out a really loud moan or scream, and then it was chaos. The aisles were so crowded, nobody could move, and I saw a fire extinguisher being passed hand to hand at the back of the plane. I immediately thought that there was a fire and that we were all gonna die. It was an incredibly hopeless sensation to know that there's nowhere to run and no way to escape this situation unfolding right in front of you. They passed the extinguisher all the way up to a male flight attendant near that guy. The flight attendant hit him with the butt of the extinguisher really hard on the face. They started asking for belts, headphones, straps, etc. Anything they could do to restrain him. My brother took off his belt and gave it to them. They wrapped everything they could around that passenger's arms, shoulders, and torso, securing him to that seat. I saw the male flight attendant who had hit him with the fire extinguisher carry a large black tennis shoe to the back of the plane, which at the time seemed kind of strange, and I really didn't think much of it. The flight attendants asked if there was a doctor on board to sedate the man. People kept asking if there was a flight marshal on board too, but nobody came forward. I can't remember exactly how or when things calmed down, but eventually everyone was told to return to their seats. A small group of the people that had helped restrain the man were asked to keep guard on a rotation. There were always at least a few people sitting behind him or next to him, keeping an eye on him the entire time. I think there was even someone behind him holding a fistful of his hair for the rest of the flight. The pilot announced over the PA system that there had been a security breach. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was vague, and that we were being diverted to Boston Logan Airport. He said they didn't know if the person was working alone, so get to know your neighbor. We were in the middle of the Atlantic, with maybe 4 more hours to go before we landed. Things were a bit ominous and tense, but for the most part, everyone was friendly and in a pretty good mood. Nobody really knew exactly what had happened. We weren't allowed to get up from our seats. If you had to use the bathroom, you needed to call a flight attendant to escort you to the bathroom, where you weren't allowed to lock the door either. I remember a grumpy old man in a few rows from us who got really annoyed after a while and kept getting up without permission just to annoy the flight attendants. They were not happy. After a while, they put on the movie Legally Blonde to distract everyone. My brother and I went up to business class to talk to my father. Apparently, they didn't hear the extent of the chaos back in coach. They were all going on about business as usual. A few hours later, as we approached the US, we saw fighter jets outside the window on both sides of the plane. The pilot announced that they were escorting us back to Boston. A few little kids got really excited watching those jets. I learned later that these are the last resort security measure to prevent hijacked planes from repeating 9/11 style attacks. They were supposed to shoot us down in case of a major threat. We landed and were told to stay seated. A SWAT team came on board carrying assault rifles and a ton of body armor, cut off all the guy's restraints, and took him off the plane. I saw everything in detail, since we were seated only a few seats behind him. We were parked in the middle of the tarmac for a long time before we were allowed to disembark. I remember seeing pieces of my brother's belt on the guy's seat as we left, and thought about taking one as a souvenir, but thought better of it. We were escorted to a baggage claim area in the Boston Logan Airport that was surrounded by a large metal fence to keep us all in one place. We were there for what felt like 3 or 4 hours, just waiting anxiously. No one would explain anything to us. Passengers were getting really agitated, shaking the metal fences and yelling at the airport personnel that this was inhumane treatment. There's no food, nowhere to sit. Children were crying. Dozens of people were trying to sleep on the baggage carousel. They finally ordered a bunch of pizzas and led us into the waiting area with actual chairs, where each passenger was interrogated by the FBI. They were astonishingly unfriendly. I guess they were trying to discern if the guy had any partners on board. They then shuttled us back to our baggage, where security officers thoroughly hand-searched every single passenger's shoe, suitcase, and carry-on bags, and then patted everyone down. We were finally allowed to make a phone call, and I called my mom. The rest of the family was completely hysterical. They'd been watching the news all day, and knew that an Islamic extremist had tried to blow up our flight with a bomb that he'd smuggled on board inside his shoe. We had absolutely no idea what had really happened until this moment, as we were kept completely in the dark. It was a very strange sensation. Up until this point, my dad, brother, and I had actually remained pretty relaxed considering the circumstances. We were more annoyed about the inconvenient changes to our travel itinerary than the crazy experience on that plane. We had no idea how bad the security breach really was, how close we came to being killed. After about 12 hours in Boston, we were put on another flight home. My brother made the mistake of giving a few interviews to CNN and other networks while we were in Boston. So when we landed in our small country, he was immediately swarmed by the press and gave a bunch of interviews despite being exhausted. I was happy to finally sit and relax with my family after the longest and most stressful trip of my life. We later learned that the bomber, Richard Reed, had actually tried to board the same flight on the previous day. He was detained and questioned by French security because of multiple red flags. He had no luggage and purchased a one-way ticket with cash, causing him to miss the flight. They put him on the next day's flight, put him up in a hotel kind of far from the airport, since everything nearby was booked. The following day it rained, and on the walk from the hotel to the airport, his shoes got wet. This might have been why he had trouble lighting the wick that was inside his shoe. He was planning to light it mid-flight. He waited until the passenger next to him went to the bathroom, then tried to light his shoe with matches. The female flight attendant that first engaged him had smelled the matches and was walking up and down the aisle looking for a passenger who she assumed was trying to smoke a cigarette. She saw him with a shoe in his lap and immediately tried to take it from him. They struggled and he bit her hand. Reed is now serving 3 life terms in prison. Not really sure how to begin this, and my title may make more sense after reading my experience. I'll try to be as brief and concise as possible. It was the summer of 2004. My family was supposed to vacation in Kennebunkport, Maine. My father was stuck in meetings, so he was going to come up from Manhattan a few days after us. My mother wanted to drive up, which super annoyed me at the time, but we didn't have much of a choice, so me, my brother, and my sister loaded up into the car and started that drive. I was about 14 at the time of this story. The drive itself was uneventful, but there were various delays and we ended up getting a lot later than we originally planned. Because of this, the owners of the house we were renting had turned in for the night, and we weren't able to get a hold of them to get the keys to get inside. It sounds like horrible planning, but apparently they were pretty strict about the time frame to pick up the keys. My mom, who was unfazed, decided that she wanted lobster, so we all went to one of our favorite spots. She called my dad to see if he could make reservations at a hotel in Kennebunkport from New York while we ate. We were just enjoying the lobster while a guy came up and started chatting with my mom. I figured it was just a friendly local making conversation. During this, my dad calls my mom, and my mom excuses herself to speak to him. Apparently, all hotels were booked for the night. Go figure. Height of the vacation season in Kennebunkport. The plan was for us to drive to the nearest town and just find somewhere to stay until we picked up the keys for our vacation home. Apparently that local had been listening to my mom's conversation and came back over once she got off the phone. I want to say first that there was nothing outwardly off about this guy. He was preppy, clean cut, unassuming, and fit in with the clientele. He told my mom that he had a big home with a big guest house we were more than welcome to stay with. His wife wouldn't mind. Immediately, my reaction was like, F that. No way in the world I was staying at a random dude's house in creepy Maine in the dark. My mom, doing her due diligence, determined that this guy was legit. He said he was in finance, and my mom was an investment banker. They chatted long enough for my mom to determine that he wasn't totally full of it. I called my dad hysterical. He said that I was overreacting and that I needed to get out of the city more and just accept that sometimes people are just nice. So my brother, sister, and I got into our car and followed this man back to his house. The guest house was really nice, fully furnished, but the beds were oddly placed. The guest house had 2 bedrooms, and instead of the beds being located in the middle or center, they were right under each window. It just seemed out of place. So anyway, fast forward. We're all getting ready for bed, and my mom hears a knock on the door, and it's that guy. He said he just wanted to check to make sure we got all settled in. Cool. Nice thing to do, I guess. Then about 30 minutes later, he comes back to check in again. At this point, my mom was like, thanks, we're good. We'll stop by in the house in the morning, just say thank you, etc. Fast forward another 30 to 45 minutes. I can't sleep. I'm terrified. We hear this rustling, which is odd because the guest house was nowhere near any trees or even close proximity to bushes that might cause such a noise. At this point, I see my mom wide awake, look up out the window, like motioning towards the window with her eyes. Let me add, none of the windows had curtains. The guy said it's because his wife was in the process of redecorating. When I looked up there was a male figure just standing. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I don't know how long he was standing there for. When he walked away, My mom waited a bit, then told us to get our stuff together. She wasn't messing around. We had my dad on the phone at this point. He was pretty much flipping out at my mom about something, but I didn't hear what. My mom said she was going to go put the stuff in the car and to follow her out. This was all around 2 a.m. When we got into the car, we pulled around to the front of the main house, so my mom could return to the key and say thanks and just get out of there. However, when we got to the front, all the lights were off. Not just all the lights, but it looked like no one had been home. Porch light, table lamp in the front windows, everything black. Also, the 2 cars were gone, and which we presumed to be his wife's car. After seeing this, my mom at this point was pretty unsettled. She said that we were just going to leave and proceeded to drive to the gate. The gate at the end of the driveway had been deadbolted and padlocked shut from the inside. It wasn't a super strong gate, so my dad just told her to rev it. Thankfully, we were in a big SUV and just got out of there. We drove straight back to New York City, not speaking the entire time, and we have never returned back to Maine. My parents still refuse to speak about it to this day. I ended up asking a family member about it one night when he was drunk, and he said, "Oh, they didn't tell you?" The actual owners of that house were on vacation. I'm assuming my mom or dad followed up with one of the local authorities and figured that out, but never told us that. I don't know who that man was, or what he was planning that evening. I was curious as to whether there were any known serial killers or murderers who were in that area at the time, whether traveling through or whatever. For the record, I'm a female and I'm turning 19 this year, and the story happened when I was around 15. Also, I'm from France, which can explain why my English mistakes, if there is any. When I was 15 years old, I had just gotten into my junior year, and I created my first Twitter account that I deleted because of this story. For some information, I didn't tell anyone my username, neither my family nor my friends, because I didn't really have any. My profile picture was an avatar, so there's no pictures of me on that account. And as location, I said Paris because I lived in the suburbs. I didn't have many followers, 20 or maybe 30. I didn't know that many people, so it's not really that interesting. One evening in October, someone sent me this quite strange direct message. It was someone with 200 followers on this account, and the message said, "Hi, my name is Rob. I just turned 17 and wanted to know if you lived in the area, because I'll soon be moving in and go to the town high school. I'm looking for friends." I immediately thought that something was wrong because there was nowhere on my profile that said where I actually lived. But after I spent some time thinking, I remembered of a tweet I'd made weeks ago about buses, and I mentioned the city. So I told myself that he looked up the town and just found my tweet. His age wasn't shocking because I'm 2 years ahead of my classmates. I was bored, and he was polite, so I answered him, and I told him that I did live in that town and go to that high school. The discussion was natural. We talked a lot that night, mainly about high school and about the food at the cafeteria, about the teachers, that kind of thing. It was getting very late though, and he tried to interpose some personal questions like, do you live far away from the school? Are you in a house or an apartment? Do you live with both parents? There's 5 of you. You're not often home alone. I never answered because it was way too shady for me, and unfortunately, he didn't insist. Unfortunately, because if he did, I would have probably blocked him. The next day, same thing. We talked a lot. He was still asking all kinds of personal questions to quote unquote get to know me better. So I ended up asking some too. And he always seemed to answer with what seemed like honesty. I still didn't know the answers to questions about my house though, because he definitely didn't need to know anything about that. It lasted 2 or 3 weeks, but it was enough time for me to develop feelings for him. He was handsome, super kind, and it was everything that I needed because I'd been bullied for years. And even today, I still develop strong feelings, but mostly blind trust in people who are just friendly to me. In France in October, we have 2 weeks long vacation, and the day before back to school, he finally told me he was coming to my neighborhood because he finally moved in with his mom, and he asked me a place to meet during the morning break. I was so happy and relieved to finally be able to meet him, and told him to just join me in the hall. But when he understood that there would be people around us, he said he would prefer to meet in an isolated place because he was afraid he would not recognize me and didn't want to spend the break looking for me. It was a good enough excuse for me, so I told him to meet me in the third floor bathroom because we weren't allowed to stay there during the breaks, and no one would disturb us. In my head, even though it's a little creepy, I was still in school, so nothing could happen to me. Next day, back to school day. I made myself pretty. I wore my best clothes. I counted down the minutes, and finally, when break time arrived, I ran to the bathroom and waited. When he arrived, it was him. He was not a catfish. He looked quite like his profile picture, but I noticed that he had seemed a lot older than he told me. I thought 20 years old instead of 17. We talked a lot. We got along well, and I was so pleased. And at the end of the break, he asked me to go to the fast food chain with him, just for lunch. I said no because I didn't have any money, and I always refused for people to pay for me. It's just out of principle. He seemed disappointed, but offered to walk me home after classes. I explained I have to take the bus, but that he could walk me to the bus stop. He looked disappointed again, but finally accepted this. And that's exactly what happened. It was so great that it quickly became some sort of routine. We would meet in the third floor bathroom during morning break, and he would walk me to the bus stop after classes. Big surprising fact, I never saw him in the hallways, nor at the cafeteria. But I thought at the time that the building was huge. There was over 1,500 students in here. So if our schedules didn't coincide, there's no way we couldn't meet each other. This little game lasted until December, so almost a month and a half. The 14th of December, a Thursday, I complained about how lonely I was going to be that evening because my dad was abroad for work. My brother was always at his friend's house, and my little sister was on a school trip, and my mother had to work very late that night. It was very reckless of me, but after weeks, I thought I could trust him. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. We both waited. I got in the bus, waved at him, and put on my earphones. I had 2 stops before my house, and it was about 17:45 in December, so it was already really dark outside. And as I got on the bus, I just had this really bad feeling. There was that very uncomfortable sensation on my stomach, and I felt like I was being observed. I pressed pause on my music, but kept my earphones on so that people thought I couldn't hear anything. And I think that's what probably saved my life. I live in a suburban neighborhood, very silent, especially at night, with no visibility on the big road the bus passed in. When I heard footsteps behind me and understood why I was right. There was definitely someone following me, and he was not well intentioned. At least I could hear that was not accelerating, so he was not trying to catch up to me. But I couldn't guess how long it would last. As quietly as possible, I reached for my keys in my pocket, and when I finally pulled them out, I ran. I ran as fast as I could. Best sprint of my life. I don't know how it worked, but I managed to open up and close the door before he could reach me. I then deactivated my alarm, which by the way confirmed that I was home alone. Then I took a look through the glass panel on the door. It's not a peephole, it's a whole window. So if someone wanted to see what was happening inside, they definitely could. It was Rob, a few meters away looking at me with a really creepy face. He had followed me to my home, probably with a car, and he was clearly not here for chit-chat. I still don't know why I didn't call the police. I was just totally paralyzed. We both stared at one another for a minute. When I took back control over my body, I ran into the kitchen to get a knife, and then got to the back door. He was there too, banging on the door. I feared for a few seconds that the glass would break, but thankfully that didn't happen. That moment, when I was pushing against the door and praying for it not to break, all the while he was kicking harder and harder, was the longest that I've ever experienced. After maybe 5 minutes, he stopped and got around the house, knocking against every shutter, and then got back to the front door. He looked very angry. But then my neighbor's car reached my house, and Rob quickly ran away, probably thinking it was my mother coming home. Back on Twitter the following day, Rob sent me thousands of messages before I could block him. He then deleted his account. I thought I was done with this story. I really did. But quickly after, some accounts which have just been created then followed me. All of their ads were a series of numbers and the first letter of his name. As soon as I blocked one, another one would follow me. I just chose to delete my account because I couldn't make it stop. It was much too hard to endure, because they were sending me dozens of insulting DMs. Later, I talked to the people who were supposedly Rob's classmates, because I haven't met any in days. But not a single one had ever even heard about Rob. This guy was never a student in my high school. That is why I never met him apart from our daily meetings, and that's probably why he seems so old. I never heard about him anymore, and I'm still asking myself, what did he want? And what could have happened that night if he got inside? I used to work on the north slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaskan Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds and hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long, icy roads in the winter that would lead to drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test rock formations for their oil-producing qualities. It was mid-January. The sun hadn't come quite up yet. And when I say the sun hadn't come up, I mean in almost a month and a half. Polar nights are intense. The particular well site that we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska, deep inside the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we finished and we were headed back to the camp to finish our hitch and just go home. At the beginning and end of the icy roads are guard shacks that you have to check in and out for safety. There's no cell reception and radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out at a set time, they come looking for you to ensure that you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 a.m, not that it really mattered in the land of endless night, and we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow, as the speed limit on the roads is only 25 miles per hour, when something appeared on the road in our headlights. It was a man in jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie jacket, walking down an ice road in wilderness tundra at 4 a.m, and it was negative 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for the local Inuit people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the guard shack. Seemed plausible. He didn't acknowledge us as our truck rolled up next to him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't seem cold. His clothing, while totally not appropriate for this extreme weather, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed he wasn't Inuit, but Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help and if he was okay. He didn't acknowledge us, just kept shuffling forward. His face was completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotion. The other guys in my truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and is still in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged down the road, still trying to get his attention. But in this extreme cold, I would occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell coming off of him. He smelled acidic, if that makes any sense. There was just a lot about this guy that made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had enough of all this. He rolled down his window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said that he was going to try and shake him out of this stupor. Before my buddy's hand could reach him, though, this walking popsicle spun around and latched onto my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy, and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy groaned out in pain as if he was trying to get his arm free from Mr. Popsicle. At that moment, this guy just started screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle Dude still had a hold of my buddy's arm and was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held onto my buddy's arm, keep him inside. After several moments, it could have been only a few seconds at the most, my buddy tore free from this guy, and we hauled ass to the guard shack another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we'd just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling some sort of prank, but the policy stated they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruises in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guard. We're told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the next day as well. The next time we saw the guard at his shack, we asked him if he ever saw Mr. Popsicle on his patrols. He told us they searched up and down that ice road for a solid 12-hour shift. Saw nothing. Not even tracks in the snow leading off the road. He told us it was a good prank, and he'd be getting us back for making him waste a shift driving around. But it wasn't a prank. Who would even make up a story like that? Who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer to what happened that evening, and I still wonder about that dude, if it even was a dude. The Alaskan tundra is a weird place, and that was just one of my many weird stories from my time up there. I'll work to write down more of my experiences and share them to the appropriate subs. My family loves to go on vacation in Sweden, and my grandmother even has a cottage in the forest that all family members can use if they want. A couple of years ago, when I was around 20, I was on vacation there with my mom and grandma, sometime in autumn for about 10 days. This is the Swedish backwoods. We go there to unwind, to enjoy nature and take a rest from civilization. Hiking, canoeing, foraging for mushrooms, sitting around the fireplace in the evening, that sort of thing. It's not completely isolated. You can find some villages and fields here and there, but it's definitely very rural, even though you don't have to encounter any people if you don't want to. And I've always liked to go exploring on my own, finding new paths through the woods, fixing our old maps to better reflect the current landscape. The maps you can buy of this area haven't been updated in ages, and many paths don't even exist anymore because nature has swallowed them a long time ago. What I really like is exploring abandoned buildings, and rural Sweden is really great for that. Back in the 1800s, Swedish people in their countryside were dirt poor and starving, so many moved to the New World in search of a better life. You can still find the foundations of old farmhouses, even the foundations of entire small villages in the woods, sometimes with rusted 100-plus-year-old farm equipment. Also, like many other countries, Sweden has an issue with rural exodus nowadays. Middle-aged and younger people move away to the cities. Old people stay until they die and nobody buys the house, and it just sits there, abandoned. This happens a lot. You can find many empty houses in the forest, and I just love sneaking around in them. Most of them have already been looted, presumably by hunters, loggers, or other hikers. But sometimes, you can still find interesting things, and I like not having to worry about being seen, because it's so rare to meet anyone out in those woods. So one crisp autumn day, I took one of our bicycles and a map. GPS is not really a thing out there. My phone, and something to eat and drink. Told my mom and grandma I wanted to be back by nightfall at the latest, and then just set out to explore. On the map, I had chosen a wide loop that I guessed would take about 3 hours if paths were clear, and if I didn't stop to explore. But even if I did, I guessed that I still had plenty of time until dusk. I had a lot of fun at first, driving the mountain bike down smaller and smaller forest paths, finding some old foundations of old buildings and some root cellars that were still intact and some mushrooms. I had some problems with the map though, because like I said, many paths that are still on the map don't exist anymore. So I had to turn back a few times, but mostly, I had a pretty good idea of where I was. Of course, that made it all take longer than I anticipated when I reached the furthest point of the loop and turned into a narrow path that, according to the map, would take me back an hour. The sun was already pretty low in the sky at this point too. I started feeling a bit uneasy, I have to admit. Because of my bad time management, I was worried that I couldn't trust the map even less than I thought now. Also, shortly before turning onto that path, I'd found some traps in the woods that kind of creeped me out. There were these 3 big cages, each with a platform in the middle that was connected to a steel door on the front. On those platforms were small animal remains, rotten black with little bones sticking out, bait that hadn't been touched. I took a stick and deactivated the traps by pushing onto the platform through the cage bars. When those doors had snapped shut, it had been so loud that I'd flinched, and afterwards, I noticed how quiet it really had become. Now I was clumsily cycling all over that uneven ground, and the sun was now setting. I had this uncomfortable feeling that everything around me was sort of aware, if that makes any sense. It wasn't the feeling of being watched, not quite yet. It just felt like I had to try and be quiet somehow. After a while, I came upon a crossroad in a more open area where I was supposed to follow the path straight on. The trees were not so high here, and I guess this had been one of the clearings created by a severe storm 10 years back. At the crossroads was a tiny wooden building, somewhere between a shed and a cabin. I'd originally set out to find abandoned houses, and so far, I'd only seen a couple of stone foundations and a roof cellar. So even though at this point I really should have hurried to get back, curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to check if this thing was locked and see if I could take a peek inside. It wasn't locked, but the door was kind of stuck in the frame. Inside the cabin was a cot, a tiny oven, and a bigger mass of taxidermy animals that I could have thought would fit into the small thing. They were even on the cot and on the oven, and they nailed to the ceiling and the walls. And the entire inside of the cabin, almost every inch of it, was just covered in layer after layer of black mold. It was so much that with some of the animals you couldn't tell anymore what they'd been once. With others I could only guess from the shape. They all looked monstrous, covered in that stuff, and the smell of rot and mold was overwhelming. I quickly tried to close the door again, but the wood had warped so much that it wasn't possible, so I just left it hanging slightly open and just got out of there. Already as I was cycling away from the cabin, I felt strange. This time I did feel like I was being watched. I was nonsensically thinking, you should have closed the door. You should have closed the door. I don't know why I thought that, but it made me uneasy to think that this shed was now open. I told myself, you're just being silly, because why the hell would it matter? Obviously no one was using that cabin anymore. Maybe 10 minutes later, the path entered a stretch of older woods with much higher trees. The sun was now close to the horizon, and the sky was full of orange light. Under the fir trees, it was already getting very dark. I checked my phone to maybe tell my mom that I might be late, but of course I still had no reception. A couple of more minutes into the dark forest, the path disappeared. At this point, I only had 2 options. Try to push through with my bike until I met a logging road that was hopefully on the other side of the stretch of the woods and could take me back. Or return, go past the mold shed again, and then try to get back the way I'd come. Basically, the second option was not an option for me. As I already said, I kind of had to zigzag and improvise to even come this far, because the map was wrong in so many places. Going back all the way would take ages. I could get turned around in the dark and easily lose my way. But also, and really, I didn't want to go past that shed again. I just had this sudden aversion to even look behind me. As dusk was creeping through the forest, I was getting properly paranoid at this point. An uneasy feeling crystallized into the idea that I disturbed something inside there, and that because I left the door open, something had now come out of the shed and was following me. I knew the whole thing was stupid, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Going past the shed, past those traps, and then through the ruins of that old village, past the open mouth of the roof cellar, in the dark, and getting lost out there with the feeling of something possibly on my trail, no way was I going back that way. Yes, I might even get lost trying to go through those woods in front of me. I would have to push and maybe even carry my bike. But the woods didn't seem to stretch too far in front of me, only left and right, so it seemed like the only option. I was just hoping at this point that the supposed logging road on the other side was still there. After After tearing through brambles for a bit, I found what I guessed might be the remnants of the old path, because the ground was sort of lower there. I tried to follow that until I came upon another set of ruins. Again, the foundations of some farmhouse presumably. Behind that, the ground sloped down into a marshy area and birches that seemed white in the gloom under the trees. At this point, I stopped to listen, but I still didn't want to turn around. I couldn't hear anything, but the ugly feeling of being watched, of being followed, only increased. And at this point, I felt like not only was something coming after me, but like the forest itself was sort of aware of my presence, listening maybe, or watching, like it was being deliberately quiet. I was feeling so scared that I didn't even try to talk myself out of this feeling anymore. I just accepted that this was what I was dealing with now. I had some leftover food in my backpack, a half a sandwich and some sesame snacks, and then of course the mushrooms that I'd found earlier. I took all of it out, laid it on a stone on one of the old walls that surrounded the ruins. I said something to the effect of, "Please let me go, I'm really sorry, I won't come back here, I promise. Just let me go home." Something like that. After that, I grabbed my bike and went down into the swamp, still not looking back. Luckily, it turned out it wasn't a large swamp or anything, just a wet patch for about 200 meters until the ground sloped upwards again. Still, it took a while because of the bike, which I had to push and carry by turn, because I really couldn't see anymore. I was constantly stepping into muddy pools and getting stuck. When I emerged on the other side, I was soaked in sweat, and my feet were wet and muddy to mid-calf. Still stopped frequently to listen for any sounds behind me, but there was nothing. And then, wouldn't you know it, the trees opened up and there it was, the logging road. I could have cried with joy and relief in that moment. I stepped onto the road and turned back to look behind me, but I couldn't even see the swamp through the trees anymore. It was almost completely dark at this point. Luckily, there was some moonlight, and the light on the bike also worked. I climbed on my bike and pedaled home as fast as I could. About a half an hour later, I even had some cell phone reception for a moment, so I could call my mom and tell her about what happened. Well, I told her I got lost anyway. I didn't want her to know how I'd worked myself up into a panic over nothing. Of course, she'd already been worried, and the horrible feeling I had back there deep in those woods eased up gradually. I even heard an owl and saw a deer later. By the time I arrived back at our cabin, I was finally feeling okay again, just extremely exhausted. So here's what I think happened. I got worried because I was out in the forest later than I planned, then got spooked by the ugly sight within the cabin, and at this point, basically drove myself into hysteria because of my overactive imagination and my inexperience with the forest at night. There was nothing there that wasn't explainable. Even the dead silence was probably a period in between the songbirds going to sleep for the night and the nocturnal animals coming out. All the rest, I think, was just in my head. That's why I think it was a good idea to leave the food as my sacrifice. It's like a placebo almost, a fantasy solution to a fantasy problem that worked to calm myself down. But even so, I've never been back to that stretch of woods, and I won't ever go there out again. I can never be 100% sure that there was truly nothing out there, and I don't ever want to have an experience like that again. If there is in fact something not quite right with this area, I don't want to find out what that is. Hey everyone, thanks for listening if you stuck around to this point. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell to be notified when future episodes come out. If you have a true scary story of your own, please feel free to send it to my email or post it to my subreddit. You can stalk me on Twitter, you can stalk me on Facebook, and you can also stalk me on Instagram. All these links are below. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hope you enjoyed this episode. And I don't know if you caught it, but again, I am going to stick with the schedule. Monday nights, I will be doing live readings of these stories, and then Tuesday, I'll be posting them. So Tuesday is probably going to be from here on out the regular day of the week that you'll see episodes from me. Maybe you might see another one later on the week, depending on the week. Also, sorry about last week where I went on an extremely long tangent about people. you're not here to listen to me bitch and moan and groan. So that ain't gonna really happen again. Occasionally, you know, it might slip out here and there because I'm human and I think I was just having a bad day. So yeah, from here on out, my outros are just going to be informative and letting you know what's going on with my channel. Not going to go on any more tangents or anything like that because you guys really, again, you're not here to listen to me moan and groan and bitch and whine about shit and about people because it's the internet. I knew what I was getting into when I got into it. I knew there's going to be shitheads on the internet, you know, and we live in a generation where people are very brave behind a screen and, you know, talk all kinds of shit and say whatever they want because there's no repercussions. They've never been punched in the face, even though a lot of you might need it. That's for damn sure. But for real, I love every single one of you, even the ones that complain. I appreciate you listening and just keep me humble and keep me in check when I need it. So I love all y'all. Hope to see you in the future in one of these live sessions on Mondays. Probably around 8 Central Standard Time is when I'll be doing those, and Tuesday will be the regular uploads. And then if you are a Patreon member or a member on YouTube, look for a new episode again later on this week. That'll be out. And yeah, outside of that, I hope you all have a good one. Great rest of your week. Enjoy this episode and the following and whatever. I don't know what I'm trying to say. All right. Have a good one, guys. Cheers.